The Birth of a Nation shot was much more complicated than you might think, because really Tom is the only new piece of footage in that particular scene. It's just him. We shot it in Will Rogers State Park, and so Tom was in makeup on a horse. As he rides away from us, what I had to do was look at that old footage and try to guess, how high do I think the camera is above the ground? Guess how far away Tom has to be from camera so he's riding in front of the group, which is all, decades earlier, and just how does that all mesh together?
So we start out here with our original photography in full color, and we're trying to end up in a place that's as close as possible to the framing of the Birth of a Nation footage. Picked similar lighting, similar kind of texture on a dirt road with Tom Hanks going through his actions.
That was just the shooting on the day. All the other stuff that it was incorporated in that is degrading Tom's image so it looked like all the stuff from the original footage, which was in pretty bad shape. We started off, it's supposed to be a still of Tom, so we did all this paintwork to look like an old photograph, because that's what we're looking at first, and then that starts moving, and then that sort of introduces you into the scene.
And gradually animated into bringing up the grain and the moving footage. And all of this is just the treated original element. And then at a certain point here, we start splitting in the tracked ground from the Birth of a Nation footage. And we've had to rotoscope Tom on top of this and split in the old footage.
One of the things that we were fascinated with is because the original footage has tire tracks on the road from the camera vehicles and stuff from D.W. Griffith, well, we didn't want to tamper with that, so we left that there. It's still in the shot.
Now, when I was a baby, Mama named me after the great Civil War hero, General Nathan Bedford Forrest. She said we was related to him in some way, and what he did was he started up this club called the Ku Klux Klan. They'd all dress up in their robes and their bed sheets and act like a bunch of ghosts or spooks or something. They'd even put bed sheets on their horses and ride around. And anyway, that's how I got my name, Forrest Gump.
Some scenes you'd never guess would be for visual effects is when the guys, when Forrest is now the older Forrest Gump, Tom Hanks, he's being chased by the guys in the truck and they're still throwing rocks at this poor guy. Well, you don't want to run over Tom, at least that early in the show, maybe later, but the guys are supposed to be right behind him. So we shot Tom by himself, just running towards camera. This was in our Bluff Plantation, which is where the Forrest Gump house was built, going up that road on that beautiful oak sort of alleyway. He did all this running. Then we just had the guys in the truck do a couple of passes as they run towards us. And the trick was Tom would run at us and he exits. So the guys now in the truck are running at us, but we pan with them. So it's timed so that Tom exits on a lock-off right when the truck starts to take over. So now we can pan, and when we pan around, there's a stunt guy out there finishing the run for Tom on the second piece. It's not Tom. He did the leap over the fence in the distance, if I remember correctly. And again, roto mats over Tom, him running by himself, a truck by itself. We did the same thing in as he enters for the first time the football field, and they wonder who this guy is who's running so fast. And again, he was shot by himself and doing the football scene, and then we shot the truck separately and then blended that together.
Run, Forrest! Run!
You better be running, stupid! Come on, dummy! Haul ass, dummy! Yeah, you better be running! Run faster! Yeah! Go, go! Whoa! 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 Come on, Forrest! Dang.
Run, Forrest!
We're gonna get you, Forrest! Come on, Virgil! We're gonna get you, Gump! Whoa! Dang! Get you later, fool!
Forrest is filled with sequences that never made it into the movie. And one of my favorites was with Martin Luther King. And it was the first time we met Forrest Gump as an older Forrest Gump. And it started with young Forrest and Jenny by a pool of water. He throws a rock in, and when the rings of water dissipate, we see older Tom and Jenny in a reflection, and we come back up and reveal them. There's a scene with them.
I want you to hear something, Forrest. We are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted in the freshman class for the fall term.
What's accepted mean, Jenny?
I'm going to college, Forrest. Over in Marion, isn't it something?
Yeah, that sure is something, Jenny. I never really knew anybody who went to college before, not even Mom.
What are you thinking about, Forrest? Forrest, look at me.
If you leave, who's going to be my friend anymore?
I'll always be your friend. I just can't stay here the rest of my life. You know, I want to go places and meet people and see things.
I want to go places and meet people and see things, too. Maybe I could get accepted and go with you.
Well, you know what? Maybe you could come visit me sometime.
Music!
Tom hears something. He goes, "It's a parade."
A parade, Jenny!
He runs up to it, and it's this awful confrontation, of course, between Martin Luther King's Civil Rights March and, the authorities. So he goes into the middle of it, not knowing what it is. He just thinks it's a parade, of course. And he's sort of looking around what's going on, and there's these guys, the cops there have these vicious dogs, these German shepherds that were trained to, when they let them go, they go charging at the group, the marchers, teeth bared, growling, furious. Tom, of course, as Forrest, sees the dogs. You have a quick flashback of young Forrest holding all these puppies, licking his face, because, of course, Forrest knows all these dogs, too, like he knows everybody. He runs out there just to play with them because he doesn't know anything bad's going on. He picks up a stick. He yells all their names, throws the stick. The dogs are trained to do a beautiful 90-degree quick turn, boom, and race off. He's out there playing with them, and he diffuses the whole thing. Comes back in, and he apologizes to Martin Luther King for sort of disrupting the parade.
Sorry about your parade. They just dogs. They don't know any better.
And then he takes off.
Here! Steve! Here! What do I got? I got my stick. Oh, right, lad. Who wants this stick? Come on. Here we go. Get that stick!
Sorry they interrupted your parade. They're just dogs. They don't know any better.
Well, the Vietnam sequence has an awful lot of material going on in it. The opening scene to the Vietnam section, Tom lands with Bubba. They come off the helicopter, and we follow them up and around, and there's this is like the classic Bob scene, where you're fed a lot of information and get a real sense of where you're at quickly. And he gives you, what Bob's great about is, I don't know how he can do it, he choreographs a scene where he just feeds you these little pieces just right when he wants you to have them. And he's a master at that.
Right. All right. So yeah, all right, you're showing him. Let's do that. Come on out here. Now bring this act out here. Right, and move this whole thing out here. And the rest of you guys are going to be sitting around motivating these guys.
So we come around, and these helicopters go blasting in the background. So essentially we had, I believe, 2 or 3, the most foreground helicopters came through on that to give our camera guy the move that he needed. Then at the same time, while they were shooting that, I had a camera that's behind, I don't know what it is, a bunker or something that's in the shot, and I'm down there with my camera. We had some other cameras, and we're shooting telephoto shots of the helicopters flying and getting different pieces of real helicopters. Then we took all of that stuff later and composited them into the shot and animated them flying through, but they're not 3D CG elements, they're real helicopters. What I think is kind of a cool beginning to this scene is we're following Tom. We was talking about all the different rain you go through in Vietnam. We come around with Tom, and it's really dark, but it wasn't dark, it was bright sun. So we made it look dark and moodier. Comes around, the rain stops, and the sun comes out. Well, we caused the sun to come out, got rid of the rain, and then that's when the tracer fire starts, because there's one brief animation where the guy in the foreground gets hit, and all hell breaks loose. We got this tracer bullet material, and basically we were shooting it at the camera to see what it looked like. See if we could even use it, the real thing. Well, we couldn't use the real thing because it went by so quick. but it gave us a sense of the feel of it and the reality of it. That was all animated in, basically, into the shots, looking at the jungle, and all the stuff's flying right by your face. It's hitting, there were bullet hits on plants and things that we would line up to, so it would hit just at that moment. Boom, 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 ripping stuff apart. There's a couple of guys on a large gun that get blasted away while Gary's yelling orders to everybody, trying to get everyone to do their job. And what we did is we shot our actors on this thing blasting away, and they were wired from the back. So at a certain cue, they were jerked out of the shot. We started off by shooting a fireball element or two, some explosions, I think, at different speeds, just this pyro blowing up, and I think we might have had wind kicking it up a little bit. We shot, unfortunately, we didn't have quite the right materials, but we set in these pretty lame-looking dummies that we had, and also pulled them out with wires, and basically when we pulled them out, just pieces flew in the air. Then, using that, we started layering in what happens to these guys. And this is essentially what split screens have come now, which is a very complicated version of what split screens were 30 years ago, which is, as the guys are shooting and they start to get pulled away, well, we start to paint in using the Inferno, basically, a high-speed compositing system, and we started bringing in the fireball effect. Well, as that comes in, you start manipulating the guys as they fly back, how much of the flame is covering them up. So you start painting some of that flame in front of them. You start using some of the dummy material where they start to come apart. So it's just a subtle moment where things are starting to move in ways they shouldn't move on human bodies. And then the flame takes over the whole thing. And it's also the quality of the characters. Even though it's like that, it really has a resonance to the audience because they can feel that quick moment where you can see these screaming faces just getting covered in this flame. And it's horrifying. And then you're into this insanity. Well, that builds to the thing where there's this whole scene where they're running away, they're blasting out of there, guys are getting hit everywhere. Tom realizes he's got to go back and get Bubba.
Don't you stay here, goddammit! That's an order! I gotta find Bubba!
So he runs back. They know that Dan's calling in this napalm hit, essentially. So that scene is Tom racing towards us, carrying Bubba. Essentially, we shot a stunt guy carrying another stunt guy as Bubba, running at us from the distance. Runs a little so far and hits like a dip in the road and kind of bobs down, gets back up. At that point, we do a morph to Tom lifting up Michael T., except he's on this huge wire rig on this crane, essentially, because he can't carry Michael T. So Tom's running at us, and we're painting out all the wires on that, and that's who Tom's carrying. Shoot that element. The effects guys go in, Alan Hall and his group, rig all these giant tubes of pyro material, basically in gasoline, running up towards us. And all the cameras are running, going like crazy. There it goes. We're shooting a bunch of different speeds. And here we go. Boom, boom, boom. It's coming at us. Wham, wham, wham. And the final hit, wham! It's huge. Big burning shot. It's great.
So to set this shot up, we started with a rough composite. We just sort of block in the actors in front of the pyro footage just to work out the timing of the frames. We had the first section with the stuntman. The second half we dissolved to have Tom running, and just to figure out where the original framing was going to be and where our morph transition between the stuntman and Tom Hanks was going to happen. Then up to this point, we had just been working out the timing of all the starting point of the elements in the shot. So now we had to actually rotoscope out Tom and Bubba from the scene here, and that includes all these little bushes and leaves that overlap their legs.
The jets that come flying in are all CG, 3D CG jets, and dropping the napalm, canisters is also animated in CG. And then that was back time to when they really impacted behind them.
So this is what the final composite looks like. We're bringing all the elements. We had 3 F4s. They're dropping canisters that land timed to the pyro explosion. We have our guys running our stuntman, who then transitions to Tom Hanks right there. And these guys are running. They're matted in. We're painting out the old leaves in front of the new ones there. In the end, it all looks like it all happened at the same time.
Which looks pretty cool. And it's a great shot. Another scene that was lost is Forrest goes to China, because we have that one scene in there in China, and he's playing ping pong with elder George Bush, who then was the ambassador to China. And they're playing away, and Forrest, of course, is hitting it as hard as he can. And the last shot is Forrest hitting the ping pong ball so hard that it hits George Bush in the crotch, which is taken from some archival footage where it really happened. So it was too precious not to use in the movie.
There were a lot of difficulties that we had to address when taking this player out. One was when we put Tom in, he obviously had to sync with the ping pong ball as they hit back and forth. So we began by standing Tom in front of a blue screen here, as you can see here, and we suspended these little target marks for Tom to sync the position at which he should hit the ball. So this is just a crude composite how we've taken the blue screen away and we've positioned Tom behind the table in the original archival footage. Now that we've removed the original player, we took Tom off of the blue screen and we inserted him behind the table in the correct position. We got to about this point in the process of this shot before it was actually cut from the film, but you could see that it was definitely starting to come together and was going to potentially be a very humorous shot.
The Johnson scene and the Nixon scene, and also in a different way, the Lennon scene is all the color footage. The problems were sort of similar in a way, except it was color. It just added one more layer of things we had to worry about to match to.
So we started working on the Lyndon Johnson footage. We had a whole different task because now we were working with old 16mm color footage, and there's a whole different look and feel to that. Some of the challenges were the same. We had old archival footage that we were going to position Tom into, and we're having to strip Tom in behind Lyndon's hands. And actually there was another military person in this position that we had to get rid of and then drop Tom in. In a shot like this wide view here, we decided to use a recreation where almost all of the set is actually a stage set that we shot. And then we're dropping in Johnson's head on top of a stand-in body look-alike. And what we did is we would start with the Johnson footage, look at the lighting and everything that we needed to match to, and make the rest of this scene come as close to that as possible so that our work was really just in isolating the head, dropping it on the neck, and tracking it in there. This shot, which is one of the embarrassing moments for Lyndon Johnson when Tom Hanks is sort of bending over showing him his wounds, we did the recreation approach to this as before, where we reshot the whole scene with our actors and are tracking Lyndon Johnson's head. Now, one of the problems is you can see that he continues to walk out of the scene, and we had to find appropriate footage of Johnson that was moving in some way that we could track that. And then we actually stabilized Johnson's head so that it wasn't moving, and then matched it to the other footage.
And essentially just give the whole sequence a continuity. It looked like we had pulled the whole documentary footage from someplace and you were just watching it for the first time.
I understand you were wounded. Where were you hit?
In the buttocks, sir.
Oh, that must be a sight. I'd kind of like to see that. God damn, son.
The Washington, D.C. crowd scene, this had to be a very organized shoot because we only had, I think, 2 days to shoot the whole sequence in. The one big camera had to follow Tom up as he comes up the steps. We follow him over, turn around, and reveal this ocean of humanity doing this huge cheer as he's like sitting there staring at it. So the process was to set the camera up the day before and rehearse with Tom, our stand-in, just getting the move down, the basic positions down, because the crowd has been designed by me to be in the foreground, and then through a series of shots during the rest of the day when we get the main shot done, I'm going to move the crowd from this point to this quadrant, 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 and try to fill up that space all along the reflecting pool, which is huge.
In the original background, we really just had Tom, the people on the stage, and the people just in the immediate foreground here. Then in the computer, we had to replicate these people along the sides of the reflecting pool. And what we did is we would shoot multiple passes of these people in different positions. So you can see here, this was the original background. Then we would take a group of these people, shift them over here, do exactly the same camera motion without Tom, without the people on the stage. And then we would combine that pass with just the people over here with the original background with Tom until we're able to fill them in along the sides here. And you can also note that the reflecting pool doesn't feel like reflecting that day. So in the final shot, as you can see here, we put a little reflection just to sweeten up the look of the shot, as well as put in a whole new sky.
Come on, man! Come up here, man!
Come on. Yeah, you. Come on, get up there. Come on, move. Let's go.
Come on, go. You can do it. Just get up there. Go on. That's it.
Tell us a little bit about the war, man.
War in Vietnam?
War in Viet fucking Nam! Yeah!
The football stadium was actually shot here in L.A. I think it was the University of East L.A., something like that. A very smallish football field. Went there. Basically what we did is, again, sort of like the crowd scene in Washington, D.C., but a little more elaborate, because we had to, with matte paintings, digitally paint in the rest of the stadium so it looked like it was a different location altogether.
This was one of the many crowd replication shots that we had to do through the movie. In this case, we had a stadium that was filled with maybe a couple hundred extras off in the distance, and they were holding up cards saying "Go Forrest, go Forrest," and then we had to populate the surrounding area with thousands of people. And in fact, the original stadium only had a lower tier to it, and we added an additional upper level just to add to the overall scope of the stadium.
There's a couple of very complicated but very cool shots in there you'd never know were effect shots. The ones on the ground where we're like with a Steadicam following Tom running towards us with the football, and there's a couple of scenes there where the background is completely artificial. When he's running in, he gets the ball and he races into the tunnel and he just leaves the football field, and we're coming in and it goes into slow motion. Everything in the background out that tunnel is all put in. All the crowd, the stadium, everything is a matte painting. The ping pong game was shot at Paramount Studios. There was only, I think, one tier of people put in, basically. Everything above that was all painted in and designed beautifully, so it looked like this thing went on forever. It's like, because we're in China, so it's supposed to be like these stadiums hold 100,000 people. So it just goes into the dark, basically. You just see waves of people going up. Those were all painted in for the most part. And then again, given a little bit of noise, essentially to give it kind of a sense of movement in there.
I was so good that some years later, the Army decided that I should be on the All-America ping pong team. We were the first Americans to visit the land of China in like a million years or something like that. Somebody said world peace was in our hands, but all I did was play ping pong.
A very lyrical moment, which is very beautiful, is when Tom and Jenny and Little Forrest are walking towards the Bluff Plantation House, or the Gump House. And what we did is we shot the three of them as they walked away from cameras. So we came back weeks later in a place, because we had really marked the camera position and all the information quite thoroughly. We spent the day shooting this elaborate time-lapse shot where the shadows move across the real location. Then there's moments that aren't that complicated, basically looking into the lake as he's running by it. And it's a beautiful moment in the film. We essentially took the sky and just created a perfect reflection of the mountain and everything in this lake.
Like that mountain lake, Jenny, it looked like there were two skies, one on top of the other.
The cornfield shot where young Jenny and Forrest run out there getting away from the, I think the stepdad, where she says she wants to be a bird and fly far, far away. Well, we're on the two kids inside the cornfield, and when we come back up, we're revealing this whole cornfield and distant, buildings and stuff, and these birds fly out and take off. Real sense of freedom to it, and all the birds are all computer graphic birds put in and all animated to look like they're flying out of the cornfield.
They originally set this shot up with the children sitting in the cornfield, and they had this big camera move craning up. And they tried to release these doves off on cue. However, the doves kept flying off in the complete opposite direction or not flying off at all. For the sake of time, they asked us to create these computer-generated birds that would fly off at the perfect timing and in the perfect direction.
And there's a whole sky put back. And there's a lot of sky replacement in this show to help create the kind of atmosphere Bob wanted at that moment.
Dear God, make me a bird so I can fly far, far, far away from here.
Mama always said that God is mysterious. He didn't turn Jenny into a bird that day. Instead, he had the police say Jenny didn't have to stay in that house no more.
The Dick Cavett show was a little different because it was taken from television material, which was John Lennon on the Dick Cavett show. And so we basically got that footage, watched it. The set was duplicated to look just like the old Dick Cavett set. Each shot has a slightly different blend in it. Dick Cavett was really there, made up to look like a younger Dick Cavett as he did on that show, at that particular one with John Lennon. Now, in some cases, because the sets were so similar, we were able to use a part of the real set split in with a section of the set from the TV show, and that's how close we were able to, line all those things up, so they weren't like rotoing John out of every single scene and then putting him into strictly just the live action plate in the background. And then again, his mouth was morphed.
No religion too?
Which was very difficult. John has a very unusual way of speaking, and his mouth shapes. It's very odd. When you start to scrutinize it, you realize there's some odd sort of things going on that are hard to duplicate, and it really makes a lot of difference in how his voice sounds if you don't get it right.
Here he is, Forrest Gump, right here. Gump, have a seat. Forrest Gump, John Lennon.
Welcome home.
Had quite a trip. Can you tell us what was China like?
In the land of China, people hardly got nothing at all.
No possessions?
And in China, they never go to church.
No religion too?
Hard to imagine.
Well, it's easy if you try, Dick.
Some years later, that nice young man from England was on his way home to see his little boy and was signing some autographs for no particular reason at all. Somebody shot him.
The Lieutenant Dan leg scenes where he had to take off Gary Sinise's legs, the one thing that I wanted to do, because it would add so much to the audience believing this had occurred, was to have him passing through the physical space of tables or whatever it is with the stumps of his legs, where if it was a fake and you had your legs sticking straight out like he really did in a lot of these shots, he would hit the table. He wouldn't be able to pass through it. So it changed what your impression is in a very subtle way of what's going on. Now, if we didn't do that, you could have almost believed that he had his legs tucked under or whatever it was. So there's a lot of things going on there. We tried to have Gary do things with his legs. You told the audience you weren't hiding anything. That's a complicated scene in the hospital, which didn't have too much of that going on, but it just had this dead-on long shot where you're scrutinizing that this has happened to him, where the orderly comes in, lifts him out of the bed, and takes him away. Well, what's happening there is the bed has holes in it. His legs are just down in there. The guy comes in, picks him up. His legs are dangling there. We made sure he didn't hit anything with them, and he carries them out. So then the holes in the bed were repaired digitally so they don't exist. The shadows of his real legs were removed because you're seeing them, and Gary's wearing blue stockings, which helped us a little bit on trying to pull some mats. There's also some tricks going on where there's wrinkles put in around the stumps of his legs that are painted in. So we're pushing the sheets around a little bit as his stumps sort of hit it in a way that would only happen if that was a real event taking place.
It's time for your bath, Lieutenant. Harper?
I think the more successful shots there are, which telegraphs the idea that his legs are cut off, is when he falls out of the wheelchair in that desperate scene in that crummy apartment. And what I did was I put an old table there. Gary falls out and he does the whole scene, but the table's not there. We took the table out of the scene, and then he swings with his real legs going right through where that table is and comes forward to the audience right before he forces himself back up into the wheelchair. And once we got that shot, we put the table back into the scene. We shot what's called a blank plate. Basically, no actors are in it. And then that table and that area is put back into the scene with Gary digitally, basically composited in there. So then the legs are painted out, and it just takes a little bit more away from the artificial quality of it. I mean, he could never have done that with real legs anywhere.
This is a shot where Forrest and Lieutenant Dan are shrimping, and Lieutenant Dan lowers down from the mast, and you can see as he passes right in front of Forrest that he truly doesn't have legs. In the real shot, of course, he has legs, so what we had to do was digitally erase the lower parts of his legs and replace that open space with the background of the boat, with part of Tom's arm and leg as he passed over. Now, it's particularly difficult because there's a camera move here, and the perspective of the background that we're reintroducing is shifting continuously. So in this particular case, you couldn't just grab a piece of the boat and paste it over here, because the perspective of the background in this particular area is completely different than what it might be in the area that you need to replace on a frame-by-frame basis.
And it's just the same thing we did on the boat. There's a great scene on the boat where he's thanking Forrest for saving his life, and he realizes that means a lot in this movie. And he's sitting there with his legs in front of the side of the Jenny, basically, the shrimp boat. And he swings around and jumps into the water. Well, what we did is we cut a big section out of the boat, so there's no side there. Gary's sitting right next to this hole. He does the scene with his blue legs hanging down like this, swings out right through that solid space of a boat, and then leaps off into a mattress. He never did go in the water because of all the different takes we had to do. Then we put the side of the boat back in, and then blended that into the scene with Gary, so it looked like it was a solid piece. And then all the time, each one of these leg shots, however his pants are handled with a knot at the end or whatever it is, we had to duplicate that same fill in CG and then blend that together so it all sort of covered up where his real leg was and made you believe it was a stump. And then just more complications. When he jumps, when Gary goes off, we had to go to a piece of film where it was a stunt guy jumping off, and this stunt guy is who you see through the little hole in the boat, and he's the one who went in the water each time.
Forrest? I never thanked you for saving my life.
He never actually said so, but I think he made his peace with God.
The Nixon sequence was as hard as any of the sequences, which was very hard. Taking him and mouth morphing him essentially to be able to say the line that referred to the Watergate Hotel and putting Tom up into the hotel. His guys would take care of it. He's also holding a plaque that he's going to give Forrest, which has Forrest's name on it, and we had to put the plaque face onto the one that Nixon was holding, which doesn't seem like anything, but it was such a lot of subtle bobbing and weaving and perspective changes. It was really painful matching that in.
When we start out on the shot by replacing what was on the original plaque, tracking that in, pulling all the way back out to reveal Tom, getting rid of the original guy who was standing there receiving this award, and replaced all the shelf work, added the extra little bit of camera shake. The continuing challenge in all this archival footage is it was never shot with the intention of being used for effects work. It's a camera sitting on somebody's shoulder, the guy zooming in and out, which they tended to do a lot in news situations. It's shaking all over the place. It's 16 millimeters, so there's all this grain and stuff. And trying to make that fit into our new elements was just an incredible feat of not so much pushing new technologies as really pushing the limits of doing some things we knew how to do and doing them very, very well.
A few months later, they invited me and the ping pong team to visit the White House. So I went again, and I met the President of the United States again. Only this time they didn't get us rooms in a real fancy hotel.
So are you enjoying yourself in our nation's capital, young man?
Yes, sir.
Well, where are you staying?
It's called the Hotel Ebbot.
Oh, no. I know of a much nicer hotel. It's brand new, very modern. I'll have my people take care of it for you.